So I wanted to jump on and share with you guys 3 things you must know if you're over 40 and you're curious about crypto assets, digital assets, the technology, and potentially investing. None of this is financial advice, it's more insights into how I see the markets and what gives me the most conviction to stay in the market. It's born out of a conversation that I had with my family members recently. It was a group of my aunties, cousins, and for the most part, most of them were over 40 and some in their 50s and 60s. And they asked me a question. They said, Dean, how do you have so much conviction that crypto is going to last and exist into the future? And isn't it too risky? And I was also asked, why are you wasting time as a 40-year-old man or 41-year-old man playing around with digital money? And I thought that part was fascinating. So number 1, the internet. Now, to fully understand crypto and digital assets, it's important to grasp the evolution of the internet as a consumer product. So let's go back to the mid to late 90s. One of the key attributes of the first generation of the internet was that you could own your domain. So for example, I would own dean.com for my business, and the idea is I would drive traffic to my business via owning dean.com. Or some innovative investors and entrepreneurs at the time, they bought domains for very popular names. So for example, hotel.com or love.com and so on. And what's interesting there is they owned a piece of the infrastructure at that time. And as you know, later down the line, some of those domains get sold for millions and millions of dollars. So the idea of owning a piece of the internet was very much part of the first generation. And then came the second generation, which I like to call the centralized layer. Now, we're all familiar with the App Store, where you go onto the App Store, you download an app, and then you use that app to connect, to upload your photos, in this case of Instagram, for example, or YouTube like this, you would upload your videos. But this centralized layer is third-party apps. So the key thing here is you're now uploading your data to a different platform. These social media companies, Google, etc., they now control a lot of our data. And we all understand this, and we click the terms and conditions, or we scroll down really quickly and hit accept, and then we carry on about our day. But it's important to understand that we've went from owning our own domain, owning a slice of the internet that we can then monetize later down the line, to giving our data to a third party. And in the case of some of these centralized layers, they don't necessarily provide the value back to you in the form of income. So we're giving our data to these centralized second layer companies. So let's think about what the third layer could be. And that's where I think crypto and what we call Web3 kicks in. The idea is that it would combine both of the 2 previous generations of the internet. So you can own pieces of the infrastructure, and you can still connect, interact, conduct business, just like you do on the second layer of the internet. And that's one of the huge appeals for me and why I'm involved in the space, is that ability to own part of the infrastructure. Now, if you're over 40, you probably remember services such as LimeWire, Napster, BitTorrent. And the technology behind that is not too dissimilar to the foundational technology of Bitcoin and crypto assets. And I'll explain why. So do you remember, you would go onto these services and you would download a discography of Michael Jackson, say, or you would download the latest movies, and you would wait hours sometimes because of the bandwidth and the internet speeds at the time for the video, the music to download. And then you could freely share copies of the music or the movies with your friends. Now, that technology essentially is just a series of computers connected to the internet, and someone had copies of the original and they uploaded it to the internet and then started sharing it. Now, I want you to just think about that and imagine if that was money. the problems that that would cause. And we'll come back to that later. Number 2, how money is created. Now, I'm going to speak from a UK perspective, but it's highly probable that it's similar in many of the other Western nations and probably all over the world. So 80% of the money in the economy is created from bank lending. And I'll give you an example of this. If you take out a mortgage or a personal loan with a bank, that money never existed before you decided to take out the loan. I know, crazy. That money is created out of thin air and placed onto a ledger, the bank's ledger. And the bank charges you interest on that, so that's 100% profit for the bank. And then when you pay back the debt, that money is kind of erased, deleted from the ledger. In essence, money in circulation is primarily debt. And when I first discovered this, it kind of blew my mind that money is just created out of thin air. And you guys might remember The Wolf of Wall Street and that clip where Matthew McConaughey, I think his character, is talking about how they don't create anything and how it's all fugazi. I come to understand what that meant over the last 5 years. So it's one of the reasons why I believe that borrowing, and when you're borrowing, primarily should be for productive use, where you can flip the money or earn your own interest on it, use it for investing in a business or whatever, so that it's productive. Otherwise, which I've found and I've experienced, you just end up in more and more debt. And that's what, in my mind, is crippling nations and people from a personal level. And just think back to the pandemic and the amount of money that was created as stimulus or PPE loans or business loans, or in the UK it was Eat Out to Help Out. A lot of this money, and I've been using the word money because it's easy for people to understand, but in essence it's currency, it's fiat currency. And fiat currency means it's by decree. It means that the government has ordained that we should use this currency as legal tender. And it's not actually backed by anything. But again, that's a rabbit hole for another day. So all of these loans that were created was money created out of thin air and added into circulation. And now we wonder why prices have increased so much and why we have so much inflation. I think it was Milton Friedman who said, Washington creates inflation. And the point being fiscal spending from governments getting into debt causes all of the inflation that we all have to live with. The food hasn't got any bigger, but the prices have increased. And a lot of people are wondering why. And I know there's more mechanics to this and it's a little bit more nuanced and I'm maybe simplifying it. But in essence, banks create money through lending and borrowing. That money didn't exist before the loan, and most of our economy and most of the money in circulation is in fact debt. I call it the dilution drink theory. So those of you in the UK and know about Robinson squash or any kind of squash cordial drink across the world, the idea is you would pour some of the squash or the cordial and then top it up with enough water to keep the flavor intact. But then if you pour too much water in, it dilutes the drink and it's effectively like you're drinking water. That's effectively what's happening to our currency, the money. The banks, in conjunction with the governments, create more currency. It gets put into circulation. And it means you have more currency chasing fewer goods in the real economy. So prices have to rise. And what's really happening there is the denominator is falling in value. So the prices increase and it takes more of the dollars, the currency for us to purchase the same amount of stuff. I learned this before I got into crypto around 2020, early 2020. And as someone who wasn't a seasoned investor, who never really invested before, I was shocked that that's how the system is designed. And it makes me think of a quote. Now, allegedly, this quote is not attributed to Mayer Rothschild. The BBC apparently has said that he is not on record of ever saying this, but I think the quote is still interesting to think about. So apparently he said, or allegedly he said, "Give me control over a nation's currency. I care not who makes the laws." So in essence, if you can control the supply of money in the economy, you basically are in charge. And the idea that 80% of our money supply is actually debt and is created through borrowing and it never actually existed is really incredible, and something that since I learned it, I haven't been able to get over it. And so that's the second point. How money is actually created, and the majority of the money that we use is debt. So number 3, what is Bitcoin? The technology, not the price. So Bitcoin is 2 things. Number 1, it's a network of computers where data is shared in a peer-to-peer fashion. It's also a digital asset. Now, this digital asset can be transferred 24/7 to anyone, anywhere in the world, providing you have an internet connection. And at the heart and the foundation of the technology is a system called blockchain. Now, if you think back to my BitTorrent example and LimeWire, the fundamental problem with those 2 technologies was that you could freely duplicate and share copies of the same data. So I downloaded the latest movie and I could share it with my friends repeatedly. I could burn it to CD-ROM and I can keep on sharing it. But imagine if that was money. It wouldn't be practical, it wouldn't work. So in a digital space, the idea of duplicating money and streaming it peer-to-peer was always a problem that was never solved until Bitcoin. And as I understand it, Bitcoin never solved the problem, it developed a workaround by combining cryptographic technology, blockchain, and a series of other technologies together to develop a workaround, a suitable workaround. And that's the version of Bitcoin that we have today. So there's only going to be 21 million units of Bitcoin. Now, in my second point was about how money is created. If we are entering into a 3rd generation of the internet and we have an instrument that has money-like properties, there needs to be a level of control around the supply. Otherwise, we'll be in the same shit that we're in now as it relates to too much inflation and effectively reduced purchasing power. So what I find fascinating about Bitcoin, it has gold-like properties, and it's still a human-based system, so I don't get too carried away by these things. I just try and understand it for what it is. But in order to get Bitcoin, you need to expend some form of energy. You need to perform some work, and it's called proof of work. And I explained to my family that what gives Bitcoin its value is that there is an exchange of energy to get the actual unit itself. And that's extremely important to understand because it ties into our whole system of life, the way we live, we all work. So the idea behind Bitcoin is it's actually an incentive for performing some work. And in case of the technology, it's to validate transactions on the blockchain. Now, to keep it really simple, if I was to share 1 Bitcoin to you, that's just data. It's ones and zeros, it's just information. There is no value in that inherent transaction. But the way the blockchain works is, and the way the mining works, is I consider blockchain to be like a time stamping system. So when it started, they pressed play on time. And every 10 minutes since 2009, Bitcoin has been validating transactions, basically a ledger documenting the history of Bitcoins being shared between people. And over time, that becomes more and more secure, and it becomes more and more sustainable, more robust. So in summary then, when you combine these 3 things, that's the internet, the evolution of the internet from being a technology which you could own part of, to a technology where you gave your data to a 3rd party, back to a technology that you can own, is hugely valuable for us, the consumer. And then when you combine and add how money is actually created in the real economy, you realize we're on a one-way street to inflation and reduced purchasing power, where things become more expensive because governments and banks can create money out of thin air, which gives them immense power and control. And then when you can place those two things together, you actually get Bitcoin. That's how Bitcoin was created, because of those two things. The inefficiencies in how money is created and the disparity it causes between society and people, and the evolution and the natural evolution of the internet. Now, I hope you found some value in this video. I'd appreciate if you could like and subscribe to the channel and jump in the comments. Let me know what you think. Ask yourself this question: do you think our future is going to be more digital than less? The answer is yes. I think it's worthwhile exploring crypto. And with that, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.